I'm Mike Duran. I am a senior fellow and the director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at the Hudson Institute. And I'm joined today for a very exciting discussion about the turbulence in Iran by Miriam Maimar-Sadeghi. She is the founder and director of the Cyrus Forum, and she's also a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Canada. We are joined also with Alex Vatanka, who is the director of the Iran Initiative. What is it? Is it the initiative, the program? Alex, what are we calling it?
The Iran program.
The Iran program at the Middle East Institute. These are two of the most incisive analysts of Iran. And Miriam, let me start with you. And let me just say, it looks to me when I watch these clips on the web of the protests in Iran, that this is really the worst round of protests. I mean, the most the strongest opposition that the regime has seen to date. Am I right? And if I am, why do you think that?
No doubt about it. You're absolutely right. This is the most severe and existential threat that this regime, the Islamic Republic, has faced since the revolution in 1979. There's been a lot of lead up to this. As you mentioned, there have been a lot of protests, particularly in the last 5 years or so. 2019, people came out in over 200 cities and the regime massacred over 1,500. This time it's, even though 2019 was breathtaking in its scope and in the slogans, the level of participation, this time it's a whole other level. The discourse, the way that people who have sat on the sidelines for 4 decades and said nothing against the regime are joining in. I'm thinking about celebrities or people in the diaspora who like to think of themselves as siyasinista, not political. Everybody has come into supporting the people who are on the streets. Of course, the trigger hit everybody at the most emotional level, the gruesome killing of Mahsa Amini, Gina. She was only 22 years old, came to the capital city with her family from Iranian Kurdistan, and just as innocent as could be. And she had her head bashed, according to the hospital, 10 or 11 times. I wrote about it in Tablet magazine in terms of the details of the killing. And it's just, it hit everybody at a family level, because Mahsa could have been anybody, could have been anybody's daughter, could have been anybody's sister. And everybody knows that. And it's just that feeling of enough is enough, combined with the economic pressure that people are under and seeing the corruption of the regime, the lack of water, the lack of clean air, the lack of any sense of the country has a future. It's just a boiling point. And I do believe that there's no going back. If it may take time before Iranians can reach the tipping point of truly having the power on the streets so that millions can come out and there can be a transition to a new government. That may take time. But in terms of what people think about this regime, there's absolutely no sense that it can re-legitimize itself again.
Alex, do you agree with that? Is this a yet another and deeper blow to the legitimacy of the regime?
Oh, thank you, Mike, for the opportunity. Great to see my friend Mariam as well. Looking forward to the conversation. Look, I pretty much agree with everything Mariam just said. I also think that, what we're seeing now is probably something we haven't seen before, because the only other time we can compare this to, in terms of the depth and how widespread this anger is perhaps 2009. There's one big difference between 2009 and today. 2009 began as a protest against one election outcome, the fraudulent re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and a part of the regime, folks who at the time we still lived, Rafsanjani and so on, were kind of part of that movement, at least initially, right?
Mhm.
This time around, this is, as all I can tell you is, it's from the street up. And this is not about a one policy decision by the Islamic Republic. This is asking for the Islamic Republic to go away. We've had enough. And that, I think, it makes it different. Again, Mariam pointed out, we've seen protests before in recent years. On my count, since 2009, we've had 6 big rounds of protests in Iran in the last 13 years. What I cannot tell you, Mike, and I have to be humble. I mean, I was born in Iran, but I left 30 plus years ago. But I have covered Iran as an analyst for 23 years. I cannot sit here and tell you this is the beginning of the revolution. I don't have the data to say that. What I do have, as somebody who watches this place daily, is a clear trend. The anger is getting deeper. People have entirely lost hope. Reform is not possible. We can't really talk about reformists in the regime anymore. It makes no sense. The regime is in the hands of 2 entities, essentially. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the Supreme Leader's office, backed by his generals in uniform, the Revolutionary Guards. And what they have done is, in this belief that suppression, crackdown, killing the way out of it is the only dialogue they need to have with the Iranian people. Now, for a long time, they got away with it. For a long time, people would get on a plane and leave Iran. That was the solution. But what you're seeing with this younger generation, and I wouldn't, by the way, say this is just the young, but the young are clearly at the forefront. But this, as we've seen on social media platforms, plenty of older people, because the anger is so widespread. You cannot suppress yourself out of this. And this is the message Khamenei, I'm sure, is getting at this point. Where is he? If he had a good answer to what he's seeing, he would have given a speech by now. The silence by Ali Khamenei, the Supreme Leader, speaks for itself. He has nothing to say. The Revolutionary Guards have nothing to say. You know, they like to paint this as some sort of a foreign conspiracy that is hell-bent on breaking in Iran apart. I mean, if you follow Iranian official media, that's the only kind of scare tactic they have left. That if you let these protesters continue what they're doing, there will be no Iran tomorrow, because the enemies will want to split this country apart. Nonsense. The reason why people are in the streets is because they have been left no choice. There's nothing left for them. And they're fighting for it, frankly. They're fighting for it. I don't know if this, as I said, I don't know if this is the beginning of the end. But what I do know is you can expect more protests, even if this round of protests are suppressed, and we don't know if that's going to happen. But if they are suppressed, it's guaranteed there'll be more rounds of protests, because the regime has disconnected itself from its own people to the extent that I don't know if it can recover from that.
Alex, let me just plug your book here quickly. As you were talking, I was reminded of your book, one of the most interesting books I've read on the Middle East in a long time. Alex, what is the name of your book?
It's called The Battle of the Ayatollahs. And it's
The Battle of the Ayatollahs. And what I just tell our listeners here, what I found so interesting about it is that you know, we have this all this discussion in Washington all the time about hardliners versus moderates in Iran, and it's a line that I've never agreed with. I don't speak Persian. I don't speak Azerbaijani. I've never been to Iran, so it's not like I have a good sense and, you know, at my fingertips of what happens in this country. But I could sense that the moderates versus extremists, the ideological divide was a useful convenience for President Obama to sell his Iran deal, and didn't really reflect what was going on the ground in Iran. But what you have in Iran is this so hard for those of us on the outside to understand, is that there are ideological politics going on, there, for sure. There are differences of opinion. There's even a certain amount of open debate. I mean, it's managed within left and right boundaries, but you actually have people who have real differences of opinion expressing it within an autocratic system. And your book was the first analysis I saw that helped me understand that. because I'm putting words in your mouth here, but you basically said, you know, there are different mafia networks under the big ayatollahs, and they are jockeying for position with each other. So you presented a new picture. This doesn't happen very often in analysis in Washington. A new picture that helped me understand what I was seeing. I didn't mean to go on for such a long plug, but I want everyone to go see that, to read that book. So, Miriam, I'm going to reinterpret what Alex said in my own words, and I'm going to say, unlike previous protests, waves of protests, we are seeing it in all parts of the country simultaneously and deeply, so that in the Persian areas, in the non-Persian areas, it's happening at the same time and at the same level. And the protesters are also going after the security forces. They're going after the symbols of the regime. No pretense here that this is about reform. Do you agree with that? Is that do you have the same picture in your mind?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, not only is it not about reform, the people on the streets since late 2017, 2018 have had a slogan, "Islah talab usulgara dige tamom majera." Reformists and hardliners, the game is up. The gig is up. They are more furious, in my opinion, at the so-called reformists than the hardliners, because the reformists have given them the lie, the pretense of doing something when really they end up being as bad, if not worse, than the hardliners. I mean, Rouhani was responsible, personally culpable for the order to be violent towards the student uprisings in 1999, and then he became, so he really, a hardliner, was rebranded as a so-called reformist, and the West just kind of bought it, so that, but then really, true colors, the 1,500 massacred on the streets happened during Rouhani's presidency. Absolutely, it's a regime change revolution. It's a revolution for democracy. In my view, it's been in the making since the 79 revolution, because so many people were alienated by that revolution. It was definitely a revolution of terror. It was definitely a revolution that brought in a totalitarian regime. One of the myths, I think, that the regime's lobby outside the country perpetuates is that it's just the people who are associated with the Shah's government who were against this regime from the get-go. That's not true. All kinds of people who had even participated in the revolution to get rid of the Shah were victims of the terror, the executions right from the get-go in this regime. So it's a matter of power. I mean, people didn't have the power because there was such a totalizing control over society. They didn't have the power, the autonomy, the freedom to be able to be on the streets as they are today. We can get into what kinds of things have changed over the years that now people have that sense of agency and power. But you mentioned the Persian areas and non-Persian areas. Really, this is this revolution and all the protests that we've seen in Iran since the revolution show that even when the areas of Iran where there is an ethnic minority that is in the majority, such as the Arabs in the Ahvaz region, Khuzestan region in Ahvaz, in the southwest of the country, even when they come out onto the streets, or especially I should say, their slogans are very nationalist, pro-Iran. The same thing with the Kurds. I mean, when Mahsa was killed, her dad stepped out front and center right away and said, look, do not make this about separatism. Do not make this about Kurdish identity. We're all Iranian, and the anger that my fellow compatriots have is an anger of the Iranian people about this murder of my daughter. With the same thing in the Azeri area. I mean, these are Azeris, they speak Azeri. We have Azeris in Tehran. I mean, Tehran itself, by some estimates, 30-40% of people speaking Azeri or Turkish, but they identify, the country as a whole identifies as Iranian. In any case, it's a movement or a revolution where people just maybe coming at it from all different places and reasons and worldviews and lifestyles and socioeconomic realities, education backgrounds. But the place they get to is exactly the same place, that there is no viable future. There is no way that they, as a person, as a family, but as a nation, can have a future so long as this regime rules.
Alex, I would guess, I'm making this number up. I'd be curious to know what percentage you'd put on it. But let's say 20% of the people in the country think that their livelihood is directly dependent on the regime, the regime in the particular form that it's in now. If it's not 20, 15, whatever, some significant number. And they also feel that if the regime goes down, their livelihood is destroyed. Maybe even their lives are destroyed. So they're going to fight to the death. What are the signs that we should be looking for to show that the regime really feels that it's got its back against the wall and it's got to go for broke? I mean, what are we seeing those already, or are those yet to come? What are the kind of indicators that we should see that this is really not just protests across the country, but a regime absolutely fighting for its survival?
No, I mean, look, number one, Mike, I agree with you. I think it's probably around the 15 to 20% of a country of 85 million. Again, this is not a scientific data because, as you can imagine, the Islamic Republic of Iran does not allow for surveys to take place, so we don't know. But based on, the evidence that one can put together, including looking at election results where elections were boycotted by people, we can assume the 15-20% is what the regime has in terms of support. But that doesn't mean, to your point, that 15-20% will come out and die for the Islamic Republic. Just because you're a bureaucrat, a technocrat, you make your living from being a member of the regime, doesn't mean you're willing to die for it. And more importantly, it doesn't mean you believe in the regime. It does not mean that you believe in what Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards have done in the name of Iran since 1979. Nor does it mean that, as I said, you're willing to sort of die for it. And that takes us to the heart of the matter in terms of the success of this movement of protesters. How can they bring folks in the silent majority on their side? How can they bring about defections? And some of that is already happening. You've seen lots of leading personalities in Iranian, for example, the cultural scene, who have come out and in some cases really given beautifully expressed opposition to the regime. These are people who
and these are pardon me for interrupting you, but we're talking about actors and sports figures who are in Iran, and who will pay a price directly for coming out with these statements.
Well, they take the risk, but they still nonetheless have done it. And that, I think, is different. It tells you something about not just, well, people do all sorts of calculations on a personal level. But I mean, the fact is this: maybe folks believe that this time around, they should be hedging their bets and go in a different direction. I'm being a bit cynical when I say that, because the other alternative is this is not about calculations. This is about saying, you know what? I just need to be on the right side of history here. I need to speak up. And I think that's the part that we need to watch out for. The opposition in the diaspora particularly, because I agree with Mariam, there is no opposition in Iran today. There are no brave personalities that will speak on behalf of the protesters. Where is Mohammad Khatami? Where is Mahmoud Ahmadinejad? Where is Hassan Rouhani? Where is Javad Zarif? Where is Hassan Khomeini, the grandson of the founder of the Republic, Khomeini? These, I'm sad to say, these are not brave men. These are not men who represent the wishes of the Iranian people. These are men who are looking after their own interests. And right now, they think it's better to be silent. And in that sense, they're no different than Khamenei, who says silent. So the diaspora has a really monumental challenge. I say something here, some friends might be upset, but the diaspora has for years squandered massive amounts of energy that is in the Iranian population, including in the Iranian diaspora. This anger against the Islamic Republic that's always been there. Since 1979, there's this atomic amounts of energy, and we haven't had a clear message. And until the point where you have better, I'm not saying there isn't a message, but needs to be better in terms of how coherent it is and in terms of how you send it to the people in Iran, because that might just be something that helps folks who are on the fence inside the Iranian regime, including, I'm not talking about high level officials, because at this point there's no hope for them, but I'm talking about the many others who are not at the top, who don't have blood on their hands. How do you get them to jump ship, to realize that, you know what, it's time for them to go in a different direction? That's the challenge for the opposition, particularly in the diaspora.
Alex, let me just quickly, I don't want to deflect this too long to a discussion of the diaspora, but I thought that's a very interesting point you made. In your estimation, why is it that the diaspora doesn't have, or at least a major segment, a clear anti-regime message with also a clear agenda about how to change the regime, reform it?
I would just say two things. Number one, Mike, it's not unique to the Iranian diaspora. If you look at if you go back to the 1950s, to the Hungarians, to the Czechs, to the Cubans, to the Indians and the Pakistani opposition, that's the way it is. Once you don't have power, they sort of fight over it. It's not unique to Iranian culture. Look, again, 1979 revolution was a major movement of diverse political interests that came together, united around the call to remove the Shah, most of them who came to regret it. But my point is, they haven't gotten over the differences. So today, when you look at the Iranian opposition, you have far left, social democrats, secular nationalists, mild Islamists, and so on. So it's a broad group of people. The question is, how do you put them to come together and rally around a simple issue? The slogan, the Islamic Republic has to go, is powerful, and that might just be enough to keep people together despite their political differences. But you need to show people the day after, the path the day after Islamic Republic is gone. And that is, I think, is critical, because a lot of folks, like you said, Mike, a lot of folks in the Iranian regime don't have the option to move abroad and live in Canada, Australia, United States. They fear if this regime goes down, they'll lose everything. And you need to tell them, not necessarily. You don't have blood on your hands. If you weren't at the very senior levels, you don't necessarily have to pay a personal price for this. And if you do that, I think that's how you bring about defection. And again, that is key. Protest at the street level at the beginning, but you need defections. You need people to say, this regime's time is up. Khamenei is 83. He has messed things up. There is no hope. And I need to find an alternative for my own sake and for the sake of my country.
Maryam, do you agree with Alex on this point of fostering defections? And if so, how would you go about it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we are seeing defections. We are seeing people at the rank and file level not wanting to carry out orders, wanting to resign. I think we will see more of that as the people's movement, as the revolution gains traction and support. I think that there are a lot of signs that they are feeling demoralized and tired, and there's some evidence that the regime is bringing in its sort of external brigades, Fatemiyun, and some segments that they had in Arab countries, because people are hearing that the people who are repressing them are speaking Arabic. So that's also an indication that they can't rely on their own forces. And it's just simply, they don't have enough. I mean, if we go, if the movement can sustain people being out on the streets and in different parts of the big cities at the same time, all at the same time, the regime isn't going to have enough. But I do agree with Alex about his analysis of how the democratic opposition has not been effective enough outside of the country. I do think that's changing a lot, exactly with the strategy that Alex has put forth, that people are realizing that it should just be enough to be opposed to this regime and to believe in democracy, and leave the rest for after overthrow and transition to a new government. Unfortunately, the regime knows how to divide and conquer the opposition, has done it very well. I mean, aside from the fact that it has assassinated the top and most democratic, most charismatic leaders through the years, very systematically in Western countries. Aside from that, it knows how to play up certain strong feelings that people have: monarchists versus Republicans, people who are well off versus people who are not so well off. Basically, people's resentments and stuff. I mean, it's not super important, but we just have to keep in mind that the regime has been very good at doing this, and now it is failing because people are realizing that they need to come together. And also the lobby outside the country, I should mention again, that has been very strong. I mean, it has pervaded like academia, universities, book publishing, think tanks, the media. National Iranian American Council was supposedly, like this diaspora representation, community organization. People are seeing through that now. I mean, one of the positives, I think, if the people of Iran succeed and transition to a free, or at least more free government, is that people in the West might come to understand that their ideas about feminism were really going off the rails when they couldn't manage to speak up for women in Iran who were fighting for the most basic of rights, or that, classical liberalism might have some new customers, because people in Iran are avid. And I should mention the really great dissident intellectuals who are young in Iran, and activists who are very, very, they have a lot of moral clarity. They want the things that people in Poland wanted before communism fell. They want the same things that Havel wanted. They have not been sort of diseased by the wokeism of the West, and they can really see how detrimental the leftist politics, the identity politics of the West is to their cause, because the cultural relativism and the seeing everything as it's almost like saying, well, everything goes, anything is okay. No, not everything is okay. We still have in this world regimes that are totalitarian, hell-bent on bringing down America and liberalism and democracy, and countries that are democratic where people have their freedoms. And that's a significant and important difference. People in San Francisco and American universities don't want to get it. That's really their problem.
So, Miriam, can I then sign you up as somebody who's against taking a drag queen story hour to Iran? That's not going to be a big part of your agenda.
Well, I believe in LGBTQ rights. I mean, strongly, and they are a part of this movement. They're on the streets right now, but we can't. I mean, Jamie Kirchick, a friend of mine who is a gay intellectual who's written an amazing book about the gay history of Washington, D.C. It's important to listen to people who are themselves of the LGBTQ community, who, like women who are feminists, who say, look, this movement, it's really not helping us. It's something else now. It's something like I don't know, is it a cult, or is it something very ideological? It's something almost totalitarian. And it shows that even when you have democracy and you have free speech, it's possible for a minority. It's not a tyranny of the majority. It's a tyranny of the minority that is really capturing discourse. And what, I don't know who was it that said, I think Barry Weiss said it. We are all living on campus now.
While we're on this topic, let me get your take. I have my own, but I'll hold it back here because I want to hear what you have to say about this letter that was written to the New Yorker.
Yeah.
And signed by lots of professors and their friends. Oh, you're shaking your head. So I'm glad to see that you also found that letter to be off base. Is that right?
Sad. What an abomination. I mean, yes. I mean, Masih Alinejad, first starters, I mean, Masih Alinejad deserves all the respect in the world for what she's done. But it doesn't surprise me at the same time that people who never lift their heads up other than to blame Israel for something in the Middle East, who are themselves Iranian, will come out at a time like this, and instead of criticizing the regime for what it's doing, that's brutalizing girls and women, they will go after the most prominent women's rights activists from Iran, maybe the world right now. It's so revealing. I mean, they really show their cards.
Whom the regime has targeted with death. I mean, the regime is actively trying to kill her. For the listeners, I didn't explain what I'm talking about in case you haven't been tracking. Mahsa Amini, who is in Brooklyn, and the regime has sent death squads, or at least squads, to kidnap her and presumably kill her, because she's an activist for a feminist activist who calls for women's rights in Iran. The New Yorker ran an article on the protests and focused on her, gave her a big spotlight, and I don't know, dozens, hundreds, I don't know how many of professors and the people who think like professors, mainly of Iranian background, wrote a long letter of protest, like only professors can. Many more paragraphs that needed to be written to make their point, saying that the New Yorker was really it had really sunk to new lows by putting the spotlight on her at a time when the regime is murdering people in the streets. It really was an amazing presentation of the academic worldview, I have to say. Amazingly clear.
It was almost like a parody. I mean, you
well,
almost think it's comedy. You're like, is this a real letter?
I spent many years in the Ivy League, so I know it's not a parody. I mean, but you can only laugh. If you take it too seriously, you'll walk around with your intestines in a knot all day. Alex, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you before once again, because I asked you about signs that the regime is going for broke. You went on to talk about defections, but it's my impression. The reason I asked that question before, it's my impression that the regime has not yet pulled out all the stops. That they haven't sent the IRGC out in the streets to just mow down protesters. That there are levels of repression that they have held in reserve. Am I right about that?
I'm sure you are, but Mike, look, this is not Hafiz al-Assad's Syria in the 1980s. I mean, they do things differently. They've learned, because they're probably the one country on earth today that has 43 years of fine-tuning, if you will, mastering the art of suppression. So they kind of have figured out how many people you kill, how you kill, where you kill. They don't come out there and start shooting indiscriminately. They know that's going to backfire. They know that's going to backfire. I mean, if you go back to 2009, over the course of about a year, he killed about 100 people, right? They killed about over the course of a year. So yes, it's not that they cannot kill more. The question is, if need be, they will do it. And that obviously depends on where this movement goes. And I want to link this issue to the defections. More people you kill, more reason you give for folks inside the regime, including the security forces, to second guess their next moves and maybe decide this is it. I did not sign up. I didn't join the Revolutionary Guards, which has to be remembered is a force of 150,000 people. I mean, that is the biggest challenge for a lot of in the Iranian opposition. How do you get the lower ranked members of the Revolutionary Guards to actually see the reality for what it is? They haven't joined an elite force to defend Iran. They've joined an elite force that is busy killing Iranian citizens. And is that what they signed up to do? I'm not sure if a majority of the 150,000 Revolutionary Guards members want to be there, want to be known as killers of their own brothers and sisters. So, more killing you do, more reason you give for folks who are still part of the regime, part of the system, to have to wonder what they want for themselves. And that's how I look at it.
Are you that's very interesting. Are you are you making these statements on the basis of just kind of assumptions that you have from years of watching Iran, or are you, and being Iranian yourself, of course, and being talking to people in the country, or are you seeing things with your own eyes right now, things that are going on the street that suggest to you that even elements of the IRGC are very, very conflicted about this?
I haven't seen anything specific to say that this has happened so far. I would not be surprised if it did happen. It was part of the sort of reality inside the ranks, behind the curtain, that there are infighting going on. What I do know is that this has happened in recent years. And many people who have in the past been associated with Revolution Guards are seriously angered by where the country is today, and regret in many cases that they picked up the flag of the Revolution Guards back in the day when they did it. I mean, you can take this back to the 1980s. There are plenty of material, including inside Iran, of members, former members of the Revolution Guards who come out on TV and so on, expressing regret for where the country is today. So look, this is the other thing, Mike, which I don't know if we have time to get into. This is in many ways, the elephant in the room. The top leadership in the Islamic Republic are men of Khamenei's caliber. These are folks who are in their late 70s, 80s, and some older, who were first generation revolutionaries back in 1979, right? These folks are not going to be around forever. Age does it to all of us. We will die. They will die. The question for the folks who are sitting there right underneath Khamenei at the clerical level who support this regime, or in the armed forces, including the Revolution Guards, the question for them is, once that first generation revolutionaries are dead, where do we want to be? Do we believe suppression is the way forward, or do we want to take a new page and go in a different direction, inward looking, nation building? I mean, if you listen to the Iranian debate right now inside of Iran, and this is some of it is political theater, but it's also a reflection of the debate that's going on. They know, for example, that mandatory hijab has very little to do with Islam. It's about exercising power over society.
Right.
And saying, is this the smartest way of exercising power over your society? Maybe we should listen to them. Maybe we shouldn't be out there and picking up on teenagers because they're showing too much hair, because we're creating a headache for ourselves when we don't have to. And I think that is part of that sort of soul searching that surely is going on in the Islamic Republic. Is it going to be enough to bring the house down? I don't know, but it's happening as we speak.
Okay, now this began as a protest over hijab, or it was a protest over the killing of one girl for improper wearing of the hijab. But Mariam, I think it's safe to say now it has gone way beyond that. That this is not this is not about a one issue. This is really, and this is what you got. This is what I hear both you and Alex saying. This protest is about the regime itself, the very regime.
Absolutely.
Could they pivot I'm saying the regime and announce a reform on hijab and buy some legitimacy on that way, or would that be just seen as too little too late and a transparent tactic that won't work?
Such a good question. Also, we need to talk about the U.S. policy stuff, because I think that
I wanted to get there right. That was the next thing I wanted to go to, but Alex raised this interesting question about the hijab, so I wanted to follow it on.
Yeah, it all intersects. Let me just say, because I think so much of what Alex is talking about and the calculations within the regime will depend on how the U.S. reacts. But let me answer your question about hijab. I do think that hijab is the symbol of this regime. It is a tool of repression, but it's also a symbol of its ideology. And if it does decide to get rid of it, in other words, allow for freedom of dress for girls and women in Iran, I think it would be the equivalent of a communist regime deciding to have a free market. We have seen that in China. I mean, it is possible for a totalitarian regime to reinvent itself. But I think it might be that it would cause the regime to lose ground at a tactical level. The people would see it as as a massive victory, and it would galvanize the movement forward so that it goes well beyond hijab. I mean, as you already said, it is already, the hijab is a trigger issue. It's also a fundamental issue. I mean, right from the get-go, right after the revolution, women came out on the streets. My mom was actually one of them. A few days in a row, they marched against the mandatory hijab. It has always been the linchpin issue of this regime, and it's been the thing that they've held on to even through the Khatami years. Anytime that there's talk of reform, at the same time there's some very severe crackdowns on hijab, just to remind people that no, we are still who we say we are. But I think the more important thing now at this point is that the people's frustrations and the reasons that they're on the street are just far more total, comprehensive than hijab. I mean, it's like everything that is important in life, they don't have. And so for all those reasons, the grievances, in other words, are all encompassing. It's economic, it's social, it's environmental, it's issues of dignity. I mean, people who talk about God and an ascetic lifestyle, driving around in Ferraris right in front of them, when people who have a master's degree can't afford like to buy clothes and food for their kids who are going to school. It's an extreme amount of humiliation and insult that is the driver of what you see on the streets.
Mariam, I do want to move to the American policy thing, but let me just stop for a second and make sure I understand why the hijab is the central. I can't remember how you said it. You know, the central symbol of the regime, the core issue.
Yeah.
Is that because it's an issue that is simultaneously Westernization versus traditional society, politics and family, personal life? If I'm a woman and I am not wearing a hijab, it's almost a guarantee that I'm against the regime. And so by focusing on that issue, you go right into people's personal life, but also are also directing them politically. Do I have it?
You said it so well. Exactly right. It is the totalitarian mindset's dream, the hijab issue, because it's at the most personal level, as you said. It's at the family level. It's at the individual level. It gets at so-called dignity and honor of a woman. It's a lot of self-policing. And that's really what people are rejecting. I'm not going to do this self-policing for you anymore. I am not going to do the doublespeak, as Orwell said, or as Havel said, the saying one thing at home and saying something else when you walk out. People are not willing to do that. And that is the thing that breaks the back of a totalitarian regime, in my view. But what did you ask me? I forgot.
That was it. That was basically it. I wanted to make sure that I understood why. I thought it was a very interesting point that this is the core issue, and it really. I mean, you've said in a different way that this is about the regime. This is about everything. Yeah,
it is about everything, and that's
this
why
is not about one little issue of apparel.
Yeah, exactly. And that is why one of the most respected and effective dissidents right now is a woman named Fatemeh Sepehri from inside the country, who doesn't just wear the hijab. She wears a chador. She wears the most conservative, traditional, religious head covering possible. Although I've seen, for example, she has a daughter, beautiful, who doesn't wear it because when she was imprisoned, her daughter spoke out and she didn't wear it. But what's important here is that people who do choose to wear hijab are out talking about why this is a humiliation to force women to wear hijab. And Fatemeh Sepehri, because her brother is imprisoned, he wonderful physics teacher who turned to become a dissident and an organizer of teachers and teacher labor strikes throughout the country. They as a family are just absolutely brazen in how they speak about the supreme leader and how he must I mean, the anger with which she speaks and is so direct, it's so obvious that it's a catharsis of not just a person, but of an entire country. Anyway, she wears the hijab and she says that about hijab. So again, it's an issue that is by itself, because it's so symbolic for the regime, it's very symbolic for the resistance, the opposition to it.
Miriam, what's the name of your article in Tablet Magazine you referenced?
I have one on Raisi that's also important. We can get to that, but this one is called The Gender Apartheid State of Iran, or something like that, I think it's called.
Okay, thank you.
Last
Alex,
week.
Yeah.
Alex, let's move to American policy. So we're filming this on Thursday morning. Yesterday, Wednesday, there was an attack by the IRGC, I assume, into Iraqi Kurdistan, but it was also an attack apparently on American forces. At least American forces scrambled an F-15 that went and shot down a drone, which they said was headed for them. I definitely want to get to the larger American policy and what you think America should be doing, but why did the regime choose this moment to attack American forces?
I think it's part of the same kind of narrative that what you're seeing happen in Iran is actually not homegrown, that this is all a foreign plot, that the CIA and the Mossad have turned the KRG, the Kurdish regional government in northern Iraq, into a base, that everything that's happening in Iran has been orchestrated from there. And if you look at the likes of Press TV this morning, very proudly declaring that dozens and dozens of ballistic missiles have been firing at KRG sites, and this is, as I said, to deflect, try in an effort that clearly is not going to succeed, because anybody who knows anything about Iran knows that this anger could not have been engineered by anybody. No disrespect to the likes of CIA and Mossad, but the idea that they're going to be bringing people out, it just is laughable. You wouldn't for a second take that seriously. I'm not saying KRG has in the past been a base for anti-Islamic Republic elements. Sure they have. We know a number of Iranian dissident Kurdish groups that are based in places like the Kandil Mountains on the Iraqi side of the Iran-Iraq border. That's a reality. But are they instigating or leading the effort in Iran today? That's wishful thinking. That's wishful.
Is the regime tying? Is the regime tying the KRG to Mahsa Amini? Are they saying that her being a Kurd, that she was part of some kind of larger effort to destabilize Iran through the Kurds?
I haven't seen that direct link, Mike, but the regime does want to, bring the issue of Kurds and other ethnic minorities into it. I mean, this is what they want to do. In the sense that what they want to do is to put the fear of God in the Iranian population, that their country, as they've always known in Iran, is about to collapse because of some foreign conspiracy. Yeah. This is what they always like to do. And if, in fact, one of the 16 Iranian intelligence services right now might be concocting some kind of plot somewhere to blame it on some ethnic group and say, look, I think there could be operations of that nature taking place, because I've always been a winner for the regime.
Is it you said to me just now that these kind of conspiratorial claims by the regime, that the United States is and the Mossad the CIA and the Mossad are working together with ethnic splinter groups to destabilize the country and so on, that this is transparent nonsense. But is it transparent nonsense to the person on the street?
Look, I think, some people still believe in whatever the Islamic Republic has to say to them. If you listen to some of the sermons on the Friday prayer in Tehran, when the likes of Ahmad Khatami give their speeches, he's a very big fan of Ayatollah Khamenei. He's a hardliner. There's a small group that still believes there are diehard supporters, but they're insignificant in terms of numbers. They're insignificant. They don't represent certainly the future. I mean, you look at the faces. They're older generation, and look at the face of the protesters in the streets, right? They're the younger generation, the so-called Generation Z. So look, back to your point, Mike, about U.S. policy. Two things here. Number one, United States, as far as I know, unless it's been changing, still is committed to this to the stability of the country of Iraq. The United States invested plenty in Iraq over the years, is still committed to stability in that country. And having next door Iran, whenever they feel like it, want to deflect, use Iraq as a site where they carry out attacks as a way of, as I said, deflect attention, should be something the United States should be forcefully against, stand up. And I know a statement was made to that effect, but statements alone is not going to be enough. I think the US needs to make sure Iran cannot use Iraqi soil whenever they feel like it as a way of distracting and taking attention away from themselves. Number two, United States right now, the Biden administration really has to make it very clear when they speak about human rights and human dignity being a core part of US foreign policy or this administration foreign policy, that isn't just talk. So they need to be very creative. I know it's only 2 weeks into these protests, but they need to be creative. They need to look for any way they can to help the protesters, at least put enough pressure on the Iranian regime that they don't feel they have a free hand to go out there, kill as many as they like, just to get themselves out of the trouble they're in. So there are things that Biden administration can do. And final point, I don't for a second buy the argument that if you put pressure on the Iranian regime right now, because the violations of the citizens of Iran, that you give up a nuclear agreement with this Islamic Republic. I think you can have both. And by the way, the urgency for a nuclear deal isn't necessarily there. The US has other options. If the intelligence tells us that they're about to weaponize, then the US has options to stop that, at least in the short term. But the long-term investment needs to be, I think, in the Iranian people and their aspirations, because that's much more likely to stay and be beneficial to US interests than banking on Khamenei and the Revolution Guards, who at some point in our lives will be obviously swept away because of the anger they have created in that country.
Okay, Miriam, what's your view on US policy and anything that Alex said as well?
My view is that the United States, if it's serious about standing with the people of Iran, needs to stand with their aspiration. I mean, it's trite. It sounds good to say that we support their right to protest. Well, of course we support their right to protest, but you have to support, if you really support the protest, you have to listen to what they're saying. They're saying that this regime, we can't live under this regime anymore. And the United States is, is supposed to be the city on the hill. It's supposed to be a beacon for freedom in the world. We were that. We were that through the Cold War years. We were that during World War II. We are that in our Constitution, in our Declaration of Independence. I mean, the world would still like to believe in America. America needs to believe in itself, and it needs to show that in its foreign policy. Unfortunately, the Obama-Biden playbook is really based on the assumption of some kind of guilt and self-loathing about America. They located in the 1953 coup. That's almost a disinformation. I mean, the 1953 coup had a lot going in it. The American part was arguably minimal. Second, the people who really pushed it forward on the ground were the people who are in power now, the mullahs, the clerics. So to think that we're going to try and do something good for the people of Iran by what? By staying silent now that they want freedom? How does the 1953 coup equate with now not doing anything to support the people? What I mean is that the statements that are coming out from the administration are really just rhetoric. When Jake Sullivan says on Face the Nation, he said on Sunday morning that we are behind the people, but we can also proceed with the negotiations. He likened it to Reagan, actually, and what Reagan did with Gorbachev. But let's hello, Mr. Sullivan. There are people out there who are not so stupid.
When a Democratic administration justifies what it's doing on the basis of Reagan, you know it's not sincere.
But the spin, I mean, because Reagan, how did he get to have those effective negotiations? Through economic pressure. This administration wants to continue to hand over billions of dollars and expect what? That there's going to be some kind of credible pressure on the human rights front. And this, by the way, so far, the only thing that's happened is some talk about Starlink. Starlink, even if it does come through, it's going to take time. And it's more, in my opinion, a decoy, some sort of window dressing for the administration to say we're doing something for the Iranian people. Those kinds of things are really like a drop in the bucket when you compare to, we're going to hand over the regime billions of dollars if it's willing to enter a nuclear deal that is even weaker than the one that we got into under Obama, which resulted in the killing of hundreds of thousands of innocent people in Syria and was basically a national security disaster for America. One more thing is that I agree with Alex that we have other options here. Yes, the nuclear threat is a real threat, but it's also the way that the regime blackmails the West into doing what it wants. Right now, the regime wants the West to not care about the people of Iran, and it is using the nuclear program. Unfortunately, this administration, again, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but incredibly gullible, incredibly naive, incredibly bad negotiators, basically keep going back to the table when they themselves admit that they've gotten nowhere. We have other options. The other option has actually worked really well already. It's not like we haven't been using our plan B. Plan B is Israel using sabotage, cyber attacks, espionage, attacks on infrastructure, assassinations. Those are the things that have kept the nuclear program back.
So, Miriam, how do you answer the people? And I think we can number former President Obama among them, and I'm sure there are people in the Biden administration who think like President Obama, who say that what you're advocating, and especially the Israel dimension of what you just advocated, plays right into the hands of the regime because it allows the regime, it affirms the regime conspiracy theory that the United States is working together with the enemies of Iran to destabilize the country. And so those people who think that way, they always advocate just keeping quiet and whatever. If we do anything to support the protesters, it should be very quiet.
First of all, the regime doesn't need any excuses to repress the people. We've seen that. I mean, during the 2009 Green Movement, Obama chose to be silent, basically, and that didn't stop a massive crackdown. So their own playbook should be their reason. And in fact, Sullivan said that, we realized we were wrong under the Obama years. Well, if you really do realize you were wrong, and Blinken said it before they won the presidency about Syria, that he realized that there's a lot on them. I mean, really, I think it's kind of almost all on them, but they do have some reckoning, but not enough to actually change the policy.
So, Alex, final word here. You're going up in an elevator with Joe Biden an elevator to the 23rd floor. So you got a little bit of time, couple minutes, and you want to tell him, Mr. President, you should do the following 2 or 3 things. What are they?
Wow, tough one. Look, I'm never that brief. I'm an analyst. I'm supposed to write reports.
Alex, you're in an elevator. You just wasted.
I know, we're only at the 10th floor. Look, I would say this. I would say you will be blamed either way by Khamenei. Do the right thing. Invest in the Iranian people, because that's the future of Iran. There's
how do I invest? I'm President Biden now. How do I invest in the Iranian people?
You definitely don't want to start giving out or unfreezing some of the billions of dollars that Iran wants back as part of a nuclear deal, because that might just buy breathing space for him at a very critical time. But I know, Mike, you put me on the spot here, but let me take a step back and let's pretend this is one of those buildings somewhere in the world where they go up to 100th floor. And I got a bit more. This is what I would say. You got to ask the question also, why is the Iranian regime suddenly in September 2022 coming out and starting to enforce the rule on hijab the way they've done it? And I don't think it's to do with the nuclear issue. I don't think it's to do with the region. I think it's to do with the succession process in the Islamic Republic. I think Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, is very worried about what's going to happen the day he dies. There's been rumors in recent weeks and months that maybe he's going to push for his son to become the guy who's going to take over. I don't know if that's the case. I think that will be an uphill battle for him to do it. But this is what I do know. Raisi was elected, I mean, in the sort of elections that they have in Iran, handpicked by Khamenei back in 2021 on the promise of dealing with corruption, creating jobs, and reducing Iran's international isolation. He delivered on none of those points. But then he goes on and starts saying he's going to invest more money in cracking down on bad hijab. The question is why? To me, the answer is very simple. They want maximized control over society because they want maximum control when they have the succession process to be executed. And it could be Mujtaba Khamenei. Again, I think a lot of what we're seeing here is because, as Mariam pointed out, you've insulted the Iranian people so many times. Maybe you've taken this a bit too far, insulting them too much. But I think so much of what we're seeing right now is about Khamenei miscalculating about how he can prepare for the succession process. Now, where does the United States fit in? I agree with Mariam. There are things the United States can do because the Iranians do pay attention to what the U.S. does. It does shape their calculations. But let's not forget that, the country of this system, the Islamic Republic, is now getting close to that moment where they have to decide where to go in terms of post-Khamenei Iran. And so much of it, I think, is linked to that process, and that's unfolding in front of our eyes. That doesn't mean the United States doesn't have a role to play, but it just means it has to be that much more creative and spend so much more time trying to figure out what's going on inside that regime in the hope that they can shape their decisions going forward if they can stay the course. And I don't know. They might be swept away by the protesters. Time will show.
Okay, that was a long elevator ride. Mariam.
It was. I promised you 100 floors.
I'll tell you what, I did find your point about the about this being part of the succession crisis to be extremely interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Makes a lot of sense to me. What do I know? Mariam, does it make sense to you? And what would you say in your very short elevator ride with Joe Biden? And then we'll say goodbye to each other.
I would say to Joe Biden, be honest. We can see through it. You are either on the side of the people or you're on the side of the regime. If you continue these negotiations, you're on the side of the regime. The people see it. History will remember. And it's not just the Iranian people who will remember. People throughout the Middle East will remember. Even down the road, Democrats who support you will remember. Some of them are even criticizing you right now. They're telling you that not only have you gotten nowhere on the nuclear negotiations, but you're sacrificing yet again, as you did in Afghanistan, people's human rights. You have told the people of America that your foreign policy is predicated on support for democracy and human rights. At some point, you have to make that a reality. And you can't, show all this respect for Zelensky and then say, okay, we're going to, make nice with Raisi. You have to choose. You have to choose to side with freedom and the people.
That was a beautiful statement. And that will make a very beautiful tweet. And I will clip this and I will tweet this in your lovely peach jacket and your lovely, and with the lovely art behind you. This is fantastic. This is going to be our message to Joe Biden in the elevator. Okay.
Mike, rest assured, I'm still in the elevator going up. So come back to me when you can.
Alex went up the Empire State Building.
That's right.
He went up the World Trade Center and then he there anymore.
Oh.
All right. All right. Listen, you guys, thank you. This has been a really enlightening, very interesting, and thoroughly pleasant conversation. And so I wish you all the best. And I wish the Iranian people all the best. And I hope this misery ends very soon. Thanks a lot. And we'll see you soon.